Well, welcome to our first marriage series, right? I haven't done this. It's almost February, and so it's kind of when I'll do these. Probably every year we'll do a marriage series. Listen, a lot of people are married, right? And because it's really easy to be married, we only... Okay, good. You're all on the same page. So this is how this is going to go, right? So Fight Club. So right off the bat, I started writing, and let me say, this is a little bit different than the sermons you've been used to, because I'm not walking through a passage. Like usually we have a passage of Scripture and we just kind of walk sentence by sentence through the passage and just see what kind of comes out of the Scriptures. But as I began writing, and really first off, there's not a lot of great examples of marriage in the Bible. You know that? I mean, you can look. It's not easy to find, right? So, but there's a lot of wisdom literature, and there's a lot of how do we treat each other? How do we function as a community? And marriage is really just a very personal, one-on-one community. And so we can take a lot of these things and extrapolate them out, and it really help us affect our relationships. So there's not a ton of Scripture, is what I'm getting at. Okay. So the idea of Fight Club, when I decided to call it Fight Club, I was like, I hope people don't think that there should be violence in a marriage, right? Like we don't, right off the rip, I was like, I bet I offended people almost immediately, right? And I was like, but no, it's not about violence at all, obviously. We're not condoning it, it shouldn't be. Your relationship should not have violence in it, right? All right, I just want to be really clear, and if it is, you should probably talk to some people, all right? So just right off the bat. But there's a reason that I called it that, okay? And so there was a study done, I think it was out of Cornell, and it said that, and this won't be a surprise, but it said that if your relationship, or if a relationship averages 5 negative interactions for every 1 positive interaction, all right? If you have a 5-to-1 negative ratio of interactions, that the relationship almost doesn't exist. It won't do well, all right? It's going to be actually hell, right? It could be hell. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that someone will be divorced or you're going to get divorced, but there's a lot of people that just live every day in this rotation of negative interactions. And listen, what happens when we have way too many negative interactions? When we're living in a place where all of our conflict, where every time we interact, it's usually negative. Well, what happens is your nervous system will actually start to expect it, right? So when you just get used to this thing, these negative interactions. If you're having negative interactions on a regular basis, you're going to get used to those, and you're going to immediately actually expect a fight or flight reaction to a person, right? And there's a lot of relationships. Listen, my marriage, right? A lot of this comes from how much I screwed it up to begin with, all right? So when I'm not speaking kind of hypothetically, okay, I'm speaking from knowing what it's like, because we lived in that situation. We lived in a place where you just expected conflict. You expected things to go poorly. You expected, and listen, what happens then is you begin to, well, how can I stay away from home? Because what happens if you're a person, listen, if it's a boss, say you have negative interactions with a boss all the time, you get to go home, right? You don't have to live with that person. You don't have to do that. But if your negative interactions are at home, so now even home can begin to have a negative tone to it, and you will have a negative reaction. So then it's like, how often can I be gone? Right? It's like, how often can I stay at work late? Can I get extra shifts? Can I find these people to hang out with? What can I do? And then even when I go home, if I go home and it's like, okay, well now I got to find a way to distract myself. Maybe it's video games, or I got to find something to do, because I'm all we want, and this is the nature of humans, is to avoid some of that conflict, because it's not good. It's not nice. It's not fun, and no one wants it. But we get stuck, right? We get stuck in those ruts. And the surprising thing about the study, though, was not just the negative interaction piece, but actually, and stay with me for a second. So the math can be what it is, because it's hard to measure a positive interaction versus a negative interaction, right? Because it's scalable, right? Positive interaction can be very positive or be kind of positive. It could be kind of negative or be super negative. So it's kind of hard to say 1-to-1. But the study said if you had 11 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, that the relationship dissolves. And usually it doesn't make it to marriage. Usually these are just two. Do you know two really agreeable people like this? Like we're just everything's always perfectly fine. Like what actually happens is you get bored. You get super bored with life. When things are always perfect, when things are always exactly the way they're supposed to be, there's no chaos. If you have no chaos in your life at all, eventually, chaos, you call it forth, in fact. My mom had a room. I don't know if you had one of these rooms that you weren't allowed to be in. Okay, so it had like really light carpet. It has this white corner couch. It's just beautiful. It's got, she's got artwork. She's got marble tables. The whole deal, right? But it's just this one room, right? And so we just weren't allowed in it. Listen, I would feel weird walking through it. All right, not just, I wouldn't even stand at it. I would just walk quickly through it. All right, so one New Year's Eve, my parents would throw this big party, and it was probably after the ball drop, right? So my uncle was there. He's feeling pretty loose. All right, and all of a sudden, all I hear is, "Hey guys, I'm in the room you're not supposed to be in." Right, and he's in there, but the funniest part was he was like still nervous about being in there, even though he was a little in the tank, and we all go in there. It's like it's hilarious because it's ridiculous, right? Right? It's like it's too much order, and too much order, you're just gonna want to break it up. So you need chaos, and so Fight Club. The idea of Fight Club is this: it's not MMA, right? But it's the idea of training, because a club, right, this idea of being better at this, because we're going to have disagreements, right? We're going to have fights. And so if we can get better at fighting, all right? If we can get better at fighting, we're actually going to be better at our marriage, because you're not going to get rid of fighting. Anybody? Right? You're not going to get rid of fighting. So figuring out how to fight fair is going to be the goal. And I hope, so here's what we're going to do. I've got 6 things that I think will be helpful in our disagreements, in our interactions. And my hope is that you pick one, and we can kind of share this with social media. You can check in, share this sermon, the series, or our page, and say which one of these is one that you think you need to work on, not the one you think your partner needs to work on. Right? So it's about you and us as individuals getting better, okay? Are you ready? Okay. The number one rule, and I'll just give you the first one that I believe was my number one rule, all right? And I think this, if we can get this into our hearts, I think it's and again, all relationships. This won't just work just for marriage, but all relationships, right? 1 Corinthians 13. Verse 7, it says this, which means love, right? He's talking about love. He says, love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And so the number one thing that you can do to fight fair with your partner is to assume the best out of each of your encounters, right? That you've decided to commit your life to somebody, and if you're expecting them to be mean and evil towards you, you'll find it, right? But we should assume that the person that we committed our life to wants what's best for us, right? Doesn't want to hurt my feelings. If you didn't mean to, right? I never intend to hurt your feelings, right? It's about an idea of I'm expecting this thing to go well. When I come home, I'm expecting good things. When you talk to me, I'm expecting that everything you're saying should at least start out as a conversation, right? Not an instant attack. But when you're in that rut, right? When you're in that rut of negative, it's super easy to just expect it. And so one of the things that Ashley and I started to do in the last few years was really just call it out whenever it would happen. And so we'll say things like, I feel like we've been in a funk like the last couple weeks. And we say that to each other. It's because we start to feel that ratio changing, right? And so you've got to, like, when's the last time you really sat down and thought about your interactions together and had these conversations? A lot of marriage is just conversations. Just like a lot of all your relationships is conversations. Really telling people how you feel and some of those things. And so here's the thing. Anytime one of us has said that to the other one was not surprised, right? Where we go, hey, I just feel like we're not nailing it right now. And it goes, yeah, yeah, I feel that. You know, and so it's those conversations. And you go, okay, good. Like let's just work on this, right? And so again, our marriage was just bad from the jump. And next week we're going to kind of go in depth into what happens when the wheels fall off, right? When you're just on the ropes and you don't think you're going to survive. In fact, it's like counting, 1, 2. You're at the 9 count of 10. What do you do? Can you make it? Will you survive? Like those types of things. That's next week. But man, we would fight and fight and fight. And so the second thing that you really, I think you ought to do is say how you feel and why. Right? Say how you feel and why. And so I don't know if I just pick on maybe pick on the guys a little bit. This means more than I'm angry and frustrated. Right? Because that's the first ones we go to, like all the time. Like I'm just angry I'm angry or frustrated. Like we've got to kind of go a little bit beyond that. And so it's because that's our go-to. And so if I'm angry, like it's like I'm angry you made me late. How about that? Right? I'm angry you made me late. It's like, or how about when I'm late, my anxiety goes through the roof, and I get easily agitated. When I'm late, I feel like other people are waiting on me, and so my nerves begin to kind of. And then I'm not a great driver, so when I'm late, I miss exits, and then I'm even more frustrated. And so I just need you to know that when I'm late, it just does all of that to me. Is that better? That's a lot better. Right? then I'm just angry that you made me late, And it's like, well, what on the other side? And then you got to go, well, okay, well, what can I do? Is there something I can do? Because listen, there are just late people, right? They're just, God bless you, there's just late people. It doesn't matter if they woke up 2 hours early, they're still 15 minutes late. It just has nothing to do with you or anything you can do. But maybe you're not, maybe, and it's taking some time to address, when you realize what the issue is, you can take the time and go, well, how can I help, right? And by help, like I don't mean what I used to do, like when you're 10 minutes from being late, just freaking out and grabbing everybody's stuff for them and throwing it in the car and like, we're going to get there and we're going to be on time. And we're like before the 5-minute mark, like 2 hours earlier maybe, just like, let's get going. Like, let me take some of this off your plate. Like that kind of thing, okay? A lot of pointing going on, guys. A lot of pointing. Number 3, and there's no Bible verse for this one. God bless you. Don't text fight, right? There's not a Bible verse for that. But listen, we've been talking to each other for thousands of years, right? Thousands of years, humans have been, and we still screw it up. We still miscommunicate in person. We've been texting for like 20 years, right? And it eliminates so many other things that are important to communication. Listen, you know this. Like this, it's not a long point that I have for this. This is just, we need to find a point where we go, okay, this conversation has to move from text to person. Like it's devolved past functioning. All right, so that's number 3. Number 4, we use this a couple times a year. And you allow for one of you to be able to call a timeout when you're in conflict, when discussions kind of begin to devolve, the thing starts to heat up. You have to be able to remove yourself before you end up in the rage zone, right? Because once you end up in the rage zone, you black out, and then you're apologizing, and then even if you were dead right, right? If you were the one that freaked out, you're the one now apologizing, and you screwed up, and you went too far, right? So, but you have to allow yourself to take a time out. Proverbs 29, I think it's verse 13. Is that right? I can't read that. Verse 8. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger, right? So it's like we have to find a way to turn anger around. And so it's really just about a timeout. And my mom called me out on this probably, it was a couple years ago. She was over at the house, and she was just walking through the kitchen, and she looked, and I remember she looked up at the closet, and there was like a dent, kind of broken part of the closet door. And there was those cheap doors they put in homes now, you know what I mean, the hollow ones. And she looked at it, and she goes, "Carson, you need to control your anger." Like, how did you know? Like that was. She's like, "Well, first off, it's a little higher than anyone else can reach, you know." and my mom not grew up, but that was married to that in her first marriage, you know, and she'd seen broken doors and those things, and that was embarrassing. It's embarrassing, and it's shame. I was ashamed of myself, you know, and it's like those things. Like if you're not able to call a timeout, and the problem is you need both of you to allow it, right? Like you call a timeout, the other one has to go, okay, and that's not easy, because sometimes you think you're winning, right? And it's like every time, it's like I'm putting ideas together, I got thoughts streamed, like I'm making points. Like you can't just call a timeout. It's like, no, I need a timeout, and you have to say, okay. But it's a timeout. It's not an end of discussion, right? It's like, because it's still there, and they, if you ignore these things, they just get bigger, right? And so you have to go back to it. And one of the things you have to ask yourself is this: what did I do wrong? When you take a time out, and you're going to come, because you got to come back to this conversation. What did you do wrong? And that's the first thing you come back with. It's, okay. And don't be a jerk, right? It's not like, well, what did I do wrong? I thought you were mature enough to handle a discussion. And it's like, no, right? That's not what we're talking about, right? That's being a jerk, right? It's like, no, I got angry too fast. And when you laugh when I'm trying to have a serious argument, it makes me feel stupid. And so when I feel stupid, I want to fight back, and that's where that begins to kind of unfold, right? And so it's like time out. Okay, well, coming back, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Number 5. This one is very difficult to do. Cindy can attest to this. I used this word 15 minutes ago, all right? Stop using always and never. Anybody, is this anybody's thing, right? This is somebody's thing. Because listen, you're probably wrong. In fact, you are wrong. Like, I've never taken the trash out, ever. You always have to remind me, always, right? And I use that one because I don't do the trash, right? So I can use that analogy. Parker and the kids do all my trash. But it's that idea of you're also making a judgment about that person, right? Because you're saying, no, this is who you are. You don't care. And it's like, well, that's not true at all. I care, but maybe it's a systems problem, right? And there's something called disgust sensitivity. You familiar with disgust sensitivity? Okay, so we all kind of on a scale. You are more disgusted by things than somebody else, or less disgusted by things than someone else. So it's disgust sensitivity. Like it's disgusting or it's not. You can be really high in that, and if your spouse is just one level above you in disgust sensitivity, guess who always feels like things are dirty before the other one, right? So like you have to understand that some people are just not built to where like the trash is 2/3 full is not full to some people, right? To some people, the trash piling and overflowing is not full, right? It's like, no, there's still room in the area for things to fall, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's like you could still smash that one down in there, right? Like, so disgust sensitivity, you could actually be a pretty neat person. You're just not as neat as the person that you're spending all that you're married to and living with, right? So you got to take some of those things into effect. And number 6, we can go back to the Bible for this one. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 again, but verse 5. It says, love, right, love does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. This last one, it was so cliche that I almost didn't even put it in, right? This idea of keeping no record of wrong. But it's super important because there's some nuance to it. And it's something that Ashley and I had to really work out and really discuss on a regular basis because you don't actually forget, right? So it's like, well, keep no record of wrong. It's like, but I remember. And it's like, it's actually good that you remember. Because what happens, and this happens with us, we go, hey, what you just did felt like old us. And that's not an easy thing to say, right? Because it's very close to, hey, remember you used to do this. Those are very similar things, and so it has to be the heart thing, right? So it goes back to the assume the best, right? It's like, you're telling me this not because you want to hurt me, but you're telling me this because you want us to thrive, right? And what we came out of was so awful that we never want to go back there again, right? And so it's whatever it takes. It's about having those conversations, about doing those things, and those conversations, right? It's conversation. They take work, and you're not going to do it perfectly, and it's going to be confrontational. So if you're in the rut, so those are the 6, and I got 3 real quick things about how do we get out of these ruts, and then I'll close up, okay? The first thing we already kind of said was assume the best, right? Again, go back, assume the best. If you're in the rut, you've got to, before you walk in the house, you have to, okay, I'm going to assume the best. Right? You might have to have your own little time of going, man, there's a lot of negative interactions. I'm going to assume the best when I walk in here. The second one is to get ahead of the negatives, to get ahead of them. And we do this. Actually, Ashley does this well, and then I try to do it well without doing it when it's obvious that I'm doing it because she just did it. Anyone tracking there? Sometimes you just reciprocate because the person did. Like, oh, I just need to redo that. I need to do that exact thing. So it goes like this. What is something? This is so simple. But we can text each other. What is something I can do today that will make your day easier? It's super simple, right? But what it does is, because listen, likely there's something that they don't want to do today that they would love for you to do instead. But asking, especially if you're in the rut, right? If you're in that rut, it's like, oh, you never do anything, right? Oh, it's always, or it's you never, right? You see how it just kind of spirals back into these negative things. And it's like, so you've got to kind of go in and you go, okay, what is something that I can just help you with and just make the day better? I mean, it's really that simple. And then number 3, find ways to increase, right? If you're just in the rut of negative, you just got to find ways to increase the positive ones. That's the other side of it, right? So there's decreasing the negative interactions. Now how do we increase the positive interactions? And here's the thing. You know how to do this. We all know how to do this. That's why you ended up married or in a relationship in the first place, because you were so infatuated with the other person. You remember this? So infatuated that you would sit around and you would think, man, how can I surprise her, right? How can I do, what can I do? How can I spend every dime I have? Remember how broke you are in the beginning of a relationship? Because you're just spending everything you have on somebody, and all of your time, your friends are like, I don't know who that guy is anymore, or I don't know who she's never around him. She's always with him, right? Because you're you're trying, like everything you want is to make that other person feel special. So I don't have like a do A, B, and C. It's like you know what your partner likes. You just do. And if you just listen, right? If we listen a little bit better, we're telling each other what we like and don't like. We're not saying it outright, but we're hinting, we're making clues, like there's a lot to it. And so it's increasing those positive interactions. And so I'll say this. Conflict avoided is conflict delayed. And I wish I had known that. And I still struggle with that. I don't like it. I don't like conflict. But it's important for our relationship that I don't avoid it, because those things grow. They just grow. When you put something in the dark, when you leave in the dark, or you lock it away, it just gets bigger, and eventually it gets you. And that's my story. I just locked everything up, everything I could. I would explode and lose it because I didn't want to have the conversation, because it was a conflict. It was an argument. It's just one more I didn't want to have. And I just kept thinking to myself, man, if I read my Bible more, if I pray harder, if I read marriage books, if I preach on marriage, like if I just keep doing a good job as a pastor, God will fix it. And it's like, I think it's Jordan Peterson says it like this: that which you most need to find will be found where you least want to look. And it's like, yeah, that was it. It was right there. It's a conversation, some difficult things. But that's what I have for you, church.